Yes, my talk is entitled "Why Aren't We Watching More Paint Dry?" And it's really looking at FM and the barriers to FM, because there's actually a lot of good stuff out there in the kind of public domain about how we should be managing external corrosion, but we still don't do it. So looking at why not, possibly. So starting off, external corrosion, if we're maintaining it with coatings, we've got in a marine environment and we leave it long enough, coatings start to break down and we get external corrosion. This is actually from the BBC website from 2014. It turns out Aberdeen City Council found out the hard way if you don't look after stuff. They actually found out that 94 lampposts were in such a bad state that due to safety they had to replace them immediately. They had 110 that had to be scheduled for replacement, and they had to go around and inspect a significant number that was possibly over 100 for condition to determine if they were replaced. So that's cost over £2 million in terms of replacement. Probably some of us have paid a bit of that. But you know, it catches us out. This shouldn't be a surprise. We know stuff corrodes when paint breaks down, but it catches us out. There's a kind of more offshore example, bit of pipe work, it's been left to corrode. We're now going to have to do something about it. We can't just leave it like that. We're going to have to, I'm not going to get into what we did or what not, but you're either going to have to blast it and paint it, or that's quite thin, or you're going to have to wrap it, or you're going to have to replace. You know, whatever you do, something's going to have to be done, and it's going to cost you money. And probably in most cases, we could have done something to stop it getting to that state in the first place. And David showed obviously a good few examples earlier where structures were let to get into a sorry condition, and then significant costs were needed to replace them or maintain them and bring them back to fit for service. So this is what your cost looks like over the years if you kind of don't do much. This is from the Energy Institute Guidelines on External Corrosion Management by Coatings. So as you can see, over the years, if you don't do that much spend and you don't look after things, eventually your coatings fail, you start getting corrosion, and then doing the repair and the necessary FM to get it back to fitness for service, well, relevant fit for service, costs it a significant amount of money. So why are we letting that happen when this is in the public domain? You know, it shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone. You know, ultimately, in the worst case, it leads to safety issues, and I think David showed examples where you know, we've had to take walkways, etc., out of action because of dangerous I-beams, etc. So why are we not doing the right thing and maintaining things as we go along before they get into this state? And it actually gives the company a long-term financial benefit as well. So what the kind of focus of my talk really, and possibly why are we not doing this in all cases, is corporate short-termism. So we're always kind of looking to the recent quarter. So this is some data from a study was published last year, February 2017. It was done by McKinsey, the management consultants. So they basically did a survey of kind of asking executives in companies across many sectors, financial, pharma, oil and gas, etc., about their feelings on short-term pressures for their business. 87% of their execs came back and said they felt there was a really strong financial pressure to show strong performance, financial performance within 2 years or less. So they're being really focused in on looking at the short term and not the mid to long term for their business. They felt that 65% of them felt that this short term pressure had actually increased in the past 5 years. Probably potentially some of that would have been the financial crash, but equally in the oil industry we'd see the same problems from the fall in oil price. And finally, 55% of them felt that if your company didn't have a strong long-term culture, then you were likely to delay a new project to hit quarterly targets, even if in mid to long term it actually sacrificed financial value. So people are making short-term decisions. So why? So I thought I'd look at some kind of human behavior questions. So this is kind of like psychology, a bit of kind of behavioral economics. So would you choose to accept £50 now or £100 in 2 days' time? Probably fairly no-brainer. You'd wait a couple of days and you'd take 100 quid. Now, if you change the time scale, so would you accept £50 now or would you get £100 in a year's time? The majority of people would choose £50 now. And that leads to, if you plot all the information for this on a graph, you end up with that. So the discount factor on this graph is basically the difference between the £100 that you'd accept in a year time versus against the £50 now. You're basically saying £50 now to me is equivalent to £100 in a year's time, and you get that graph with time. And ultimately, you know, if I said to you, do you want a £5 now or £100 in 80 years time, you'd probably accept the £5 now, and that's why it's kind of tailing off to the end. This graph actually has really kind of big impacts on human behavior because it basically is telling us that we value money now rather than later, and it has some big impacts on how people behave. So for instance, there's a study in the US on patients who had coronary heart bypass surgery, and that surgery only works if you make the right, for like gaining a long life, is afterwards if you make the right lifestyle changes. So you need to stop smoking, you know, eat better, do some exercise. 90% of people didn't make the required lifestyle changes because they want this kind of instant gratification, instant now. There's other impacts of this graph. It's why people don't save for pensions, because you'd rather spend the money now than worry about saving it and getting the benefit in 20, 40 years time. And also marketers use it in the kind of opposite way around. If you ever see those deals for like, get your sofa now, buy it in a year's time, they're kind of working on the reverse. You get the kind of instant gratification of your sofa now, and you kind of forget it's going to cost you £1 or £2 in a year's time until the bill comes through. So that's partly why, you know, we tend to be short term. Like, it's inbuilt into humans. And this is why it matters for FM. It's because senior management are kind of, as humans, are likely to prioritize cutting costs and looking for quick wins. So they're going to look for, unless you've got a very forward-thinking kind of senior management, you're going to look for reactive over preventative maintenance. And there's our little manager going along and just picking the easy kind of apples, etc., off the bottom of the tree, because he gets a nice hit from doing an easy thing, but he doesn't have to worry about picking the whole apples for the harvest. And I guess we see it in all aspects of kind of life. You know, we end up inspecting the easy bit because it's at the deck level, painting the bit that's easy. I mean, it's not just senior management, it's humans. It's human nature to do the easy thing, not the hard thing. So we do the short-term thing, even though it's more cost-effective over the long term to actually plan a bit more and do what we know we should do. And the problem is, of course, for external corrosion management and painting, they're not quick wins in typical cases. We don't see the added value of going and painting something now. You're only going to see that impact in a lot of cases further down the line. So, I don't have the answers totally, but what can we possibly do to help move from this kind of very short-termism human nature to a mid to long-term environment in our companies? Well, we need initially, and this goes back a lot to Fraser's talk earlier, we need that data and we need that knowledge to actually go to management with the right business case based on risk and cost and resources to get them to kind of buy in, and they know what they're getting for their money and that it's going to reduce the risk of the asset. We need to make a strong business case, and we need to have the information available to make that case. And then also another thing that they found with humans is if you've committed to a mid to long-term goal, typically people will stick to it. I'm not saying they always will, but it's worth a try. Try and get your management maybe to buy into a mid to long-term FM program and commit some budget for years ahead now, because it'll be harder for them to back out of it at a later date than coming up with every year. I know that's not always going to be possible in all cases, but it's worth a try. Some other ideas, I think quite a lot of people might do this actually in their everyday life, but it's worth thinking about in terms of FM and external coatings, is if you've got a big project or a big piece of work, break it down into smaller goals. I think a good example is if anyone's into kind of hill walking and maybe you're doing a 20-mile hike around the Cairngorms or whatever, you've got maybe 5 peaks to get up. You don't think, oh God, I've got 5 peaks and a whole 20 miles to walk around. You break it down and go, right, I'm going to get to the top of that hill and then see how I do. And if I'm feeling good, I'll keep going. And you keep doing it like that. So you're kind of working in smaller goals. It's easier for your kind of brain and to manage, and it's more positive. And also, when you do these kind of smaller goals, communicate and celebrate the success that you've done them. So in the hill walking example, you know, when you get to the top of the hill, have a Mars bar. If you're more retro, have some Kendall mint cake. Feel free to celebrate it. If you're modern, you know, selfie, tweet it to your mum and your mates. I've made the top of the first peak. But you can do that in your kind of business. You can, you know, let other departments, let the asset managers know that your FM campaign on that module, on that area, on that, you know, bit of pipework has been a success, and it is going to lead to a long-term improvement of how the plant operates. So one possible example I've got in terms of that is kind of CUI FM program. So typically, rather than just reporting by how much has been stripped, how much has been painted, and cost, also maybe consider building in how the risk of that area and that bit of the asset has come down. So, you know, as you go through the program, you might be able to demonstrate that you've brought that kind of high-risk item that was kind of corroding down to a more medium to low risk level, and that's, I think, something useful for the asset managers and the senior management to like hold on to, that you've actually brought that down to a manageable risk level, and it'll probably stay like that for 5-10 years, etc. if you've done a good FM program. So just to kind of summarize and wrap up some of my talk, I just want to kind of read a quote that I've got from a book from a professor of history of science and technology. This is a quote that says, "Maintenance and repair are matters we'd rather not think about. The subject is left in the margins to marginal groups." So the kind of final message is really, let's not be a marginal group here. Let's shout our successes to management and make them realize that integrity is a key part of safe, efficient, cost-effective operations through the age of the asset. And if we do that, hopefully they'll give us the money to go and paint stuff, and we'll see more paint dry. Thank you very much.